Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. My special guest tonight is David Cobb. He is the North Coast Regional Director of the California Public Banking Alliance. Welcome, David. Thank you so much for coming on.
Howdy. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. So, David, we've been talking about public banks on this show for quite a bit. I talked to a gentleman from Philadelphia that I was telling you about. They're trying to get something going there. It seems like they're like one vote away from that happening. I want to start from the very beginning for people who may be new and may not be aware of what a public bank actually is. So let's start there. How would you describe a public bank?
Well, Sabby, it's a great question. And I'm not being coy and I'm not being a smart aleck when I say a public bank is a bank owned by the public, right? I mean, literally, that is at its fundamental core. It is like private banks are owned by private individuals and they operate at a profit. They are a profit motive institution. And a public bank actually is a bank that does not have to return profit or a return on investment to shareholders. And so therefore can actually operate in the public good. And I'll take this opportunity to take one step back and say straight up, I am by practice and theory a revolutionary. I believe we have to restructure this entire society because our current society is fundamentally racist. It's fundamentally sexist. It's fundamentally class oppressive. And as if that shit's not bad enough, and I know from your show, you and your guests and your audience know that's terrible, right? But let's be clear, the current social, political, and economic institutions are literally going to destroy this planet. Yep. So I say that because I want to be crystal clear. Public banks are non-reformist reforms, which is to say we can win public banks right now. They are in what social movement people call Overton's window, right? They're the things that are capable of being won right now, and done properly, they can undermine white supremacy. They can undermine capitalism. They are a way to begin to transform and democratize economics itself.
Well said. And there is a public bank in this country that you guys have, if you're older members of the show, you've heard me refer to this before, the Bank of North Dakota, which I feel like more people need to know about. And I want to hear a little bit about this bank from you, David, because what some people may not realize is that when the 2008 housing crisis happened, North Dakota actually did not suffer at the same extent as other states because they had a public bank. So they didn't take the same type of hit that other states took. But I want you to tell everyone a little bit about the Bank of North Dakota.
Well, I'm so glad you went right to the Public Bank of North Dakota because it actually shows that a public bank can operate in the current system, right? Because like, I don't have to tell your listeners or your viewers that public bank is not, or North Dakota is not exactly a hotbed for communists and Reds and revolutionaries, right? Like It is a politically and culturally very conservative place. And yet they have a public bank. Now, Sabby, it's worth pointing out that public bank is over 100 years old and is the result of the very progressive populist uprising that swept this country 100 years ago. But the Public Bank of North Dakota operates, again, for the public interest. It offers basic checking and saving accounts and other retail banking to North Dakota residents. It also, because of the unique structure of the state-owned public bank, the public bank does not compete with the private sector for retail deposits. So it provides a service for both individual retailers and can be available for small small ranchers and small farms. So the plan of how the savings account works is a way to show that you can democratize a finance, and the public bank, again, has been successful for over 100 years in this country.
That's right. A friend of mine actually had moved to North Dakota a couple of years ago for work. And he said he was paid very, very well. And he said he made this statement that, like, in North Dakota, they have more jobs than people. But what he noticed, like moving there from North Carolina, they did not seem to have some of the same issues that we had, like in North Carolina at that time, because one of the reasons, again, they had that public bank. So even when we look at something like Medicare for all, and there's this debate about whether or not this should happen on the national level or we should try through the states. Well, one of the pushback criticisms that we get in reference to trying to do this through the states is that who's going to pay for it, right? Like you still have to get the funding approved by the federal government. But I'd say the way that you can push back on that is by having a public bank. So a state like North Dakota, I think, would be a great place to start for something like Medicare for all. Now, I'm not sure if residents in North Dakota would want that, would want Medicare for all, but it's just something that people should think about, I think.
Well, and look, that's a very good point. And what you're underscoring is that if we had a public bank, we democratize finance. And so it allows those kinds of decisions to be made. Now, we already talked about it, Sabby. The reality is that North Dakota ain't a hotbed for liberal progressives or revolutionaries. So sadly, you might have a hard time convincing them to do a public bank. But I'll tell you, here in California, where we have passed landmark legislation to allow the creation of up to 10 local or regional public banks, it's being driven by affordable housing advocates, climate justice activists. So there are a whole group of folks who are absolutely considered on the left, who are at the cutting edge in the forefront of advocating for public banks, precisely because we see it as a way to be able to finance and fund the kind of social change that we support.
That's right. And this is a good point here by Roger. Thank you so much for this. North Dakota is number 51 in homelessness. Wonder why? Exactly.
Yeah, there you go. Right. Again, thank you, Roger, for that, because I'll tell you, it's not just homelessness, but in addition to that, as Sabby very accurately pointed out, during the housing crisis, they had what I think it was, they were one of the fewest number of foreclosures. And during the meltdown of 2008, in addition to that, while other states were suffering massive credit crunches, North Dakota did not suffer there as well. And again, I'm not saying for a minute that public banks are the end all be all, but what I'm saying is they are a profound improvement over our existing economy. And Sabby, if we actually had public banking and worker-owned cooperatives and participatory budgeting and universal basic income and community land trust to take both housing and land off of the commodity market, we could literally begin a peaceful revolution, democratizing the economy within the current system. And that's why I am, even though I am a self-proclaimed revolutionary, I do the work of public banking because I see it as a mechanism for the deeper transformational change we so desperately need in this country.
Well said. This is a great question by Douglas. Credit unions. What's your opinion about that? Do you feel that credit unions are just as good as a public bank, or do you feel like it's still a part of that private sector in a sense?
Well, it's a great question. And I would like you asked the question, well, is it as good as a public bank? No. Is it better than Wall Street banks? You bet. The way I actually encourage people is to think about it this way. The absolute worst way to do banking is big mega Wall Street banks, right? So better than Wall Street banks are, okay, locally run or so-called community banks, but they're still banks and they still have shareholders. Credit unions are way better than banks, right? Because credit unions are actually operating on the benefit of the members themselves. So credit unions are definitely better than banks. But Sabby, here's the thing. Credit unions are almost exclusively for what are known as personal lines, right? So if you go into the whole model of how credit unions operate are for personal banking only, right? So that means, home mortgages or auto or boats, that sort of thing. Very personalized banking services. And that's how the business model works. And it's because there are federal restrictions on what credit unions can or cannot do. So what are known as commercial lines, right? So for the big, massive infrastructure projects, credit unions can't work. They just can't handle that kind of money. And as an example of that, I can tell you the creation of the California Public Banking Alliance, many of us came to public bankings from Standing Rock. Why? Because so many of us had actually been part of the movement of divest, right? Divest from Wall Street, invest in our local communities. And we had some success in a couple of places. Portland, San Francisco, Seattle, Los Angeles, where we had elected officials say, okay, we're willing to consider it. Where should we go? And the rallying cry was credit unions. Yep. And what I and others found out is the credit unions cannot handle the billions of dollars that a major the city of Seattle, for example, which was the first place that we really started to get some traction, where we thought we're going to get one. We're going to divest out of Wells Fargo. Sabby, we couldn't find a credit union that would take it. And that's where I began my learning journey. Oh, credit unions are not the answer. They're good. I bank at Gulf Coast Coast Central Credit Union, right? So I'm a member of a credit union. I'm a supporter, but credit unions are not enough. Public banks are different because they can handle the massive infrastructure projects, which is one of the reasons that I want to really underscore what's so exciting. Here's something, and I want to challenge because I've seen your show before, right? You've got a very active, engaged video audience and listener / viewership, right? Do the research. When we think about the big, massive public infrastructure projects, like big bridges or roads or big sewer systems, right? These are often hundreds of million dollars, sometimes billions of dollars of projects. Check this out, Sabby. About 40% of the actual cost of all of those big infrastructure projects, 40% of it is the cost of the privilege of borrowing money. In other words, it's not actually the payment of the materials. It's not the payment of the wages. It's not the administration. It's literally just the privilege of borrowing money. It's a scam. It's a racket. So a public bank for a infrastructure project can literally save taxpayers off the top about 40% of the cost of every public infrastructure project.
That is amazing. That is amazing. Now, you're a part of the California Public Banking Alliance. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I'm really excited to tell you that that we are, with the passage of our bill, we became the first state in the union in over 100 years to allow a process to charter public banks. Now, a charter is just like, I'm a lawyer by training, right? A charter is just the birth certificate for an entity, right? That's what an incorporation actually means. So, Sabby, and I also I have a practice of being humble and telling on myself when it's appropriate. So I'll say, when we first started the movement for public banking in California, our desire was a public bank for the state of California, right? A true public bank for the state of California. And our bill was introduced. We had champions in the legislature, and it was in the first session in 2019 was introduced. So about several months into the legislative session back in 2019, the Representative Santiago and Chu came to us and said, hey, y'all, this is actually getting some traction. And I think that we could act and Governor Newsom has indicated interest. If we change this bill, amend it to, instead of being a public bank for the state of California, and instead make it a pilot project to allow the creation of up to 10 local or regional public banks, as basically model or pilot projects, I think that we could get this passed. And Sabby, I got to say, all of my colleagues had the reaction you did. Their eyes got big. They were like, oh my God, that's so exciting. And I said, oh no, we should not do that. We've just begun. We should not negotiate with ourselves before the real fight happened. We'll never get this passed in 1 year. So we should fight for what we're for. This is a long struggle. We shouldn't give up. And everybody, basically the rest of the leadership, all disagreed with me. So in my organizing culture, we've got to practice disagree, but commit, right? So I said, all right, I disagree with y'all, but you're my comrades. So I am going to disagree, but I commit to working hard to make this happen. But I just want everybody on the record to note, I said we should not make this compromise. And believe me, all my colleagues love to occasionally remind me, hey, David, remember when you wanted it on the record not to compromise? Because they were right. I was wrong. We made a compromise. And in one legislative session, we got all the way through the state assembly. We got it through the state Senate. Governor Newsom signed it. We are now going through the process. And now what we have is a genuinely good-natured cooperative competition to see who will be the municipality to have the first public bank in California. And I'm here to tell you, it's not going to be here in little old rural Humboldt County. It will either be Los Angeles or San Francisco or East Bay, basically Oakland and the East Bay, or Sacramento. There are 4 places where, and we imagine being in competition with a group of people who are literally coming together and sharing best practices, right? So when I say good-natured cooperative competition, the California Public Banking Alliance operates in exactly that way. The difference is in California, because we did it, it's not a statewide public bank, it's a local or regional one, and it's not a personal lines bank. It would only, the depositors could only be the city or county government or fire districts or school districts or so forth, right? I mean, does that make sense? I hope I'm not getting too much in the weeds, but I think it's important to note that as an organizer myself, I'm a very opportunistic organizer, Sabby. Like, I'm a revolutionary. I believe in theory, but I also know this. As soon as Fred Hampton said, theory's cool and all, but without a practice, it ain't shit, right? Like, you've got to actually put things into practice. And as soon as you put it into practice, you've got to be willing to adapt, make moves, and so forth. So we in California are eager to work with other people at the state level or at the local level. You mentioned Philadelphia. I think Philadelphia is right on the cusp. There's some exciting things going on in Philadelphia. I shared with you the state of Massachusetts. There's some exciting, like, the public banking movement is growing. And I think that what makes California unique is, and I say this, you know, without false modesty or false immodesty, we've actually got legislation through. We are now working with the state regulators for how to promulgate the rules associated with what that public banking is going to be. And it's very exciting in California.
I am very surprised that Gavin Newsom was like on board for this, because he is definitely corporate, usually in the pocket of big banks. So I'm very surprised that he approved it. Why do you think that is?
Well, I'll tell you, Gabby, Sabby, I'm so glad you said that, because look, just to be clear, y'all, I'm a Green Party member. I ain't no Democrat. And I believe that like the Democratic Party leadership are like controlled by the neoliberals. And they, like the neoliberal, for the most part, would rather like have Republicans in office than people like us, right? Mm-hmm. So I want to be very clear. I came into this with very clear understanding. Part of the reason why I did not want to like buy into this, like, oh, we can get it passed and Newsom would sign it, because I didn't trust him, right? So let me answer the question then that you answered. Why do I think that happened, Sabby? I think it happened the same reason that you're seeing a renewed interest in worker-owned cooperatives and community land trusts and participatory budgeting. Answer, because capitalism is failing. We're not just in late stage capitalism. This is end stage capitalism, Sabby. Like literally, I think that what we are finding is a lot of people who would never give somebody like me or you or your viewers and listeners the time of day. Frankly, they're getting desperate and they're seeing fascism rise and they're willing to try things they were never willing to try before. I don't think for a minute that Gavin Newsom is a genuine progressive. He's damn sure no radical, right? He is, in fact, a friend of Wall Street, but I think that he was willing to try some things because there is a level of desperation. The housing crisis is acute. The global climate crisis and the sea level rise, like Gavin Newsom is a politician who is willing to try some things. Make no mistake about it. He's not, quote, on our side, but he was willing to try something. That's all.
Do you think part of this could have to do with the fact of the mass exodus of people from California? Like a lot of people have been leaving California also?
You know, that's a good point. I got to admit, I had not actually thought that through. And, you know, one thing you'll learn about me is like, I have to think about that. Like, I don't know. I hadn't really, I'll say when you say it, it's like, damn, I hadn't thought about that, but it has the ring of, yeah, that makes sense. So I guess my answer to your question is, do I think it could be? I damn sure think it could be. I'd have to think through a little bit. But that has the ring of, yeah, I bet that was probably part of it too.
Yeah, the very first, for people who are newer, the very first interview I did on this show 2 years ago, it was a girl named Brittany. She's a YouTuber, but she does like vlogs. She actually was a part of that mass exodus. And so I brought her on to talk about that, like why she left California. And she kind of brought to my attention that a lot of people were leaving California and moving to states like Texas and Arizona. And she did both. So she left California, moved to Arizona, and then settled in Texas, where she'd been recently. But she brought to my attention like a lot of the economic problems that people are experiencing in California. She told me like growing up in California, and she's from there. And it's not often you meet someone who's actually from LA. And she's from there. And she said that growing up there, it was never realistic to think that you would ever be able to buy a house. So these are some of the things that people, you know, I think California residents are dealing with. You know, it's a state that has a lot of movie stars and musicians, whereas it seems like a lot of people there are making just enough to get by, but not get ahead.
I mean, I think that's exactly right, Sabby. And I can tell you the housing crisis in California is acute, right? And getting worse. And it's going to continue to get worse because I'll take one step back again and tell you the global climate crisis is not coming. It's here and it will get worse. And the economic crisis is not over. And in fact, capitalism can't solve the economic crisis because capitalism is the root of the economic crisis. And that capitalism's crisis is actually twofold. One, it is destroying Mother Earth faster than we can replenish it. That's why capitalism can't be reformed. Ultimately, we're going to have to restructure our entire political economy. And deeper than just the existential crisis of the commodification problem, Sabby, with automation, robotics, the new technology, we're moving into laborless production. And the way capitalism always produces profits for the capitalist pig is by allowing them to extract the surplus value of the labor of the worker. See, the capitalist does not care about me or you or our families. They put us to work because they make money from us. That's literally like the whole idea of the surplus value of labor. They extract the surplus value of labor of the worker. Well, as we move into laborless production, the capitalist short term is, oh, yay, I don't have labor costs. but long term, they're not going to be able to extract the value there. And so this is what pisses me off. We should be living in paradise right now, right? There's enough to go around. If we addressed the class issue, and I don't mean socioeconomics, I mean true Marxist understanding of that there is a ruling class and a laboring class, right? And people, like, there's so many of these, I'll just call them idiot, populists who say, I'm a capitalist. And I'm like, do you own the means of production? Like, if you don't own the means of production, you might support capitalism, but you ain't no capitalist. There's a definition of that word. And that is the people who own the privately own the means of production. Sabby, here's the thing. What we're going to see is an acute worsening of the global ecological crisis, the economic crisis, and that's why fascism is rising. Because the political system cannot solve the problems now. And polarization is just going to get worse, right? And frankly, the neoliberal Democrats, they don't have a plan. That's why they're willing to look at things like public banks and participatory budgeting. And again, those are just reforms. Remember, I'm a non-reformist reformer. I'm willing to fight like hell for reforms to make people's lives better, but you will not satisfy me with merely having public banks. I want to democratize the entire economy. I want to abolish the billionaire class. I want to restructure society. And I believe that public banks are a mechanism, a way to begin that process.
Well said. So California Public Banking Alliance, I want to make sure I put the website up here on the screen for people so they can see this as well. This initiative is gaining a lot of steam. Like I know like other people have reached out to me about this as well. And I want to make sure people in the audience are aware. California Public Banking Alliance, we are a coalition of public banking activists working to create socially and environmentally responsible city and regional public banks. Publicly owned, local, ethical banking. Eric, can you put the link to this in the chat? And what I like about this is that you also have the legislation here, so people can read the legislation for themselves. I've talked to so many people, they've come on and they said, well, yeah, this bill passed, but if I go to the website, I don't have access to read the legislation. So I think it's really important that you guys actually have that information here on the site, and donating if you want to help support the California Public Banking Alliance. We can put this link in the chat as well, Eric, because they do need the funds to keep this going and to win. And I also want to ask, you know, in reference to the friendly competition that you were referring to, I think that is a phenomenal idea. That makes sense. It motivates people more. Like, not to say there wasn't motivation initially, there is, but it puts that extra oomph in your step, so to speak, and says, well, yeah, I want to beat this region. So guys, let's go ahead and get it together. I thought that was a great idea.
And Sabby, again, like, so it's competition, but it's friendly competition, right? In other words, it's like we literally meet the leadership of our various cities. If you take a look at that website, viewers, if you go to that website that Sabby just put up, you'll see here are the alliance cities. And I think we're up to 12 local. We're like a confederation, right? About 35 of us are on monthly calls together, and we're literally sharing, here's where we are in our lobbying effort. Here are the talking points that we're using. Like, we literally, there you go, there's the photo, right? Look at all those different cities, right? So once a month, we come together, we support each other, we're spurring each other on. But believe you me, when I say there is a competition to be first, there is absolutely, it's a friendly competition, but it is absolutely a competition to try to see who gets to be the first public bank locally in California.
That is awesome. And also, those of you, if you're interested, I know quite a bit of you live in California. If you're interested in joining, there's also information here for that as well. And also, are you interested in starting or joining a public banking campaign in your city or region? So definitely go to this site, guys, because I know we've talked about the possibility of trying to start something like that here as well. Here's your resources. You know, sometimes you don't need to reinvent the wheel. If the wheel is already there, you can piggyback off of this. So thank you so much as well, David. I think it's important that you put that in for, or maybe not just you, but that information is also put on the website as well, because I think a lot of times, you know, people have come on and they've talked about what's happening in their city, but then the question is like, okay, so how do we do that where we live? So right. I think it's great that that's there.
I want to add, because I know we're coming to the end of the segment. So I'll say, if you live in California, the California Public Banking Alliance, there is a national public banking movement. But if you contact us, absolutely, we will get, like, you don't have to be in California. If you're in California, we can get you plugged in to any local effort if you live someplace where there already is one. And if there's not, we'll help you start one in your local area. But if you live in a different area, we can get you in touch with and network you into other places. Because at the end of the day, the only way that we're going to actually be able to overcome the ruling class in this country is if we unite and fight together. That's right. David, thank you so much for coming on. Well, it was my pleasure. And I want to give a shout out to Roger and to all the folks who put you on my radar. Because I will say, and I want to congratulate you, because you just got a milestone, didn't you? Right? Pretty recently, a number of subscribers. I did. Thank you. Say it out loud. Come on. You got to learn to promote yourself. I can't do it, David. Do it. 40K, guys. Woo! 40,000 subscribers, y'all. That is a big deal. It shows that people's media works. So I want to thank you again, Sabby, for this opportunity. It's been my distinct pleasure to be your guest. And you should have me on again, because I want to talk about worker-owned cooperatives and the Indigenous Community Land Trust. Like imagine that. People who have revolutionary rhetoric who also get shit done. That's right. Thank you so much, David. Bye now. All right, guys. Lots of information there. Definitely share this with people, guys. I know a lot of people have questions about public banking, but what I really did like about the California Alliance is that they don't just tell you about what they're doing on that website. They also have information for how you could start something like this in your own city. So I think that's important. You know, a lot of times we hear from people what they're doing, but they don't tell you how to do it. And I think that piece is very important.